My CEO's son destroyed my life's work in 2 weeks. He deleted my access, ruined the code, and humiliated me. So I built a secret backup he didn't know about. When his demo crashed, I sold my own work back to them for millions. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious, where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I wasn't just tired, I was hollowed out. My eyes burned with that specific gritty dryness that comes from staring at a monitor for 18 hours straight, a sensation I had grown intimately familiar with over the last 4 years. I was sitting in my ergonomic chair, the one I had practically lived in, when the screen flickered. A simple command prompt, one I had typed 1,000 times to check the server load, suddenly returned a message that made my stomach drop through the floor. Access denied. Administrator privileges revoked. I blinked, assuming it was a glitch. I typed it again. Access denied. My heart hammered against my ribs. This platform wasn't just code to me. It was a living, breathing entity worth $70 million. It was my legacy. I had poured my blood, sweat, and sanity into the architecture, missing birthdays and anniversaries to ensure it was bulletproof. And now, out of the blue, I was locked out of my own house. I looked up across the open-plan office, my vision slightly blurry from exhaustion, and saw the email notification pop up on my second screen. It was a company-wide blast from the CEO's office introducing the new head of product vision. The realization hit me colder than ice water. I wasn't experiencing a system error. I was being erased. The betrayal felt sharper and more agonizing than any physical blow I had ever taken. The panic didn't set in immediately. It was replaced by a slow, seething realization of what was happening. I walked into the conference room 10 minutes later, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of sudden, violent obsolescence. The room was cold, the air conditioning blasting as if to preserve a corpse. At the head of the table sat the reason for my lockout. He didn't look like a tech lead. He looked like a fashion model who had gotten lost on the way to a runway. He was wearing loafers that cost more than my first car and a suit that fit too perfectly. He was smiling, a wide, predatory grin that didn't reach his eyes. He started speaking and the nausea returned. He wasn't talking about latency or server stability. He was throwing around words like synergy loops and gamified compliance, phrases that meant absolutely nothing but sounded expensive. "We need to disrupt our own ecosystem," he said, tapping a laser pointer against a projection of my architecture which he had clearly redesigned in Microsoft Paint. "Travis, your old protocols are heavy, we're going agile, lean, no more red tape." "That red tape keeps client data from leaking to the dark web," I said, my voice raspy. He just waved a hand dismissively. "Details were big picture now." I sat back, feeling the eyes of my team on me. They looked terrified. They knew, just as I did, that removing those protocols would turn the platform into a ticking time bomb. But as I watched him preen, a cold calm settled over me. He had revoked my network admin rights. He had locked me out of the cloud console. But in his arrogance, he had forgotten one crucial thing. The founding architect keys, the hardware-bound credentials I kept in a fireproof safe at home, weren't tied to the Active Directory. He didn't know they existed, and that ignorance was going to be the only leverage I had left. To understand why this hurt so much, you have to understand what I gave up. I have a vivid memory from 3 years ago, my daughter sitting on the floor of my home office on Christmas morning unwrapping a dollhouse. I was there physically, my body in the chair, but my mind was deep in a recursive SQL query that was stalling the beta launch. I nodded when she showed me the toy, gave a thumbs up, and turned back to the screen. I missed the light in her eyes because I was too busy ensuring the uptime of a system that was now being gutted by a 27-year-old with a shiny MBA and a famous last name. Colin Wexler, that was the parasite's name. Colin was the CEO's son, a man who had founded 3 startups that all quietly imploded before Daddy bilaid him out. Now he had parachuted into our company to fix what wasn't broken. He walked through the office like a feudal lord inspecting the serfs. He didn't ask questions to learn, he asked questions to trap people. "Why are we spending so much on redundancy?" he asked me later that week, leaning on my desk, invading my personal space with the smell of expensive cologne and entitlement. "Seems like wasted capital. Let's free up those resources for the UI over." Lol. "Because if a server fails, we lose financial records," I explained slowly, as if speaking to a toddler. "Stop thinking in terms of failure, Travis," he sneered, checking his reflection in his phone screen. "Think in terms of velocity. You're too attached to the old ways. You're blocking the flow." He looked at my dual monitor setup, then at the photos of my family pinned to the cubicle wall, and finally at the expensive ergonomic keyboard I used. We're going to be shaking things up, Travis. Lean teams, hungry teams, maybe you've just been, well, eating too well off the company dime. The threat was veiled, but it was there. He wasn't just here to change the code. He was here to take everything I had built, put his name on it, and kick me to the curb. I tried to play by the rules, I really did. I went to Marcus, the CTO, a man I had known for 10 years. I sat in his office outlining the catastrophic risks of Colin's innovation. I showed him the dependency charts, the load-bearing code Colin was stripping out like copper wire from a wall. Marcus just rubbed his temples, refusing to meet my eyes. "Write it out, Travis," he mumbled. "Just keep logs, let the kid figure it out, it's political." Then came the meeting with HR. They suggested with straight faces that I mentor Colin. They wanted me to teach the arsonist how to hold the match. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to be the silent victim in their corporate tragedy. I went home that night and dug through a dusty file box in my basement until I found it, the original compliance charter we had drafted 5 years ago. Buried in the fine print of Section 8, Clause C, was a provision we had inserted as a failsafe against hostile takeovers or bad actors. The founding architect emergency override. It granted superuser access in the event of an existential threat to the platform's integrity, and Colin Wexler was exactly that. I sat at my home terminal, the one air-gapped from the main office network, and plugged in my hardware key. It was a small, heavy USB drive that hadn't seen the light of day in years. I ran the script. It was silent, invisible to the standard monitoring tools Colin was glued to. A green cursor blinked, access granted. I didn't stop the train wreck, I just made sure I wasn't on it. I initiated a full silent snapshot of the stable system, the version before Colin touched it. I called it the Ark. I buried it deep in an unused sandbox partition, locked behind checksum triggers that would scream if anyone touched it. Then I set up the surveillance. I wasn't just backing up code anymore, I was recording a crime scene. The atmosphere in the office had shifted from tense to toxic. 3 days later, we were in a product sync meeting. The staging environment was already a glitchy funhouse. Features were breaking in real time during the demo. A crucial data validation tool failed right on the big screen, returning a string of emojis instead of financial records. "That's just legacy debt," Colin announced loudly, waving a hand at the screen. "Travis's old code is struggling to keep up with our new velocity. We'll purge it in the next sprint." The room went quiet. He was blaming the foundation for the cracks in the heavy, disjointed structure he was piling on top of it. I couldn't stay silent. "That's not legacy debt," I said, my voice cutting through his monologue. "You deleted the validation checks on the SQL intake. You're letting raw data hit the database. It's not struggling, Colin, it's corrupted." Colin turned slowly, the charm evaporated. "We don't need negative energy here, Travis. We need problem solvers, not blockers. If you can't see the vision, maybe you shouldn't be in the room." He didn't offer a fix. He didn't ask how to repair the database. He just attacked my character to hide his incompetence. He looked at the team, smiling that tight fake smile. "See, this is why we need fresh blood. Old guard gets scared of speed." He was doubling down, unaware that every word, every lie, and every dismissal was being logged in a dossier that was growing rapidly on my private server. Colin was now in a frantic race against reality. He wasn't just pushing bad code, he was erasing the evidence of it. He began bullying the QA team, telling them they were too slow and that bug tickets were anti-progress. Slowly, the Jira tickets started disappearing. He was deleting the bug reports, wiping the history of the failures he caused. I was sitting at my desk, isolated, when a chat window popped up. It was Bria, our quietest junior developer. She sat 3 rows away, but she didn't dare look at me. "Bria, he's deleting the rollback points. He's pushing straight to live without reviews." I tried to stop him, but he revoked my permissions. A cold chill went down my spine. Pushing to live without rollback points wasn't just reckless, it was suicide. But then I saw something worse. I checked T. He hidden forensic logs I had set up with the override. There were approvals for these reckless pushes, approvals that required a senior architect's digital signature. My signature. Colin wasn't just breaking the system, he was framing me for it. He had forged my approval credentials to authorize his catastrophic changes. If the system crashed, and it would, the logs would show that I had signed off on every single error. He was setting me up to be the fall guy for the $70 million collapse. I watched him from across the room, laughing on the phone with his father, probably bragging about the upcoming investor demo. He thought he had won. He thought I was just an old, useless coder he could pave over. He had no idea that I had a mirror copy of every keystroke he made, time-stamped and hashed, ready to blow his world apart. The day of the demo felt like a stage play produced by people who had never seen reality. The company had rented a cavernous, industrial-chic event space downtown, all polished concrete floors, exposed brick, and aggressive lighting. It was designed to scream success, but to me it felt like a mausoleum. Investors filed in, men and women in sharp suits holding branded notepads, their faces eager. They were there to see the future of compliance tech. I sat in the back row, deep in the shadows, blending into the drywall. I wasn't there to participate. I was there to witness the execution. Greg, the CEO, kicked things off with his usual theatrical flair. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, gesturing toward the stage like a ringmaster. "We promised you disruption. We promised you vision. Today my son Colin delivers it." Colin strutted onto the stage. He looked immaculate, practically vibrating with unearned confidence. He launched into his speech, a word salad of paradigm shifts and frictionless ecosystems. Behind him, the massive screen displayed a dashboard that looked beautiful, pure aesthetic fluff covering a rotted core. The investors were nodding, scribbling notes, mesmerized by the animation. "And now," Colin said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, "we go live." He pressed the large, ceremonial enter key on the podium laptop. It was supposed to be his coronation. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The loading spinner spun gracefully. Then the screen flickered black. A collective gasp rippled through the room. When the image returned, it wasn't the dashboard. It was a cascade of red text: fatal exception, database corruption, null pointer reference. The system didn't just crash, it vomited. The live feed of client data, which Colin had recklessly hooked up, began displaying garbage characters. Privacy masks failed, exposing raw strings of nonsense. Colin froze, his smile twitched, stuck in a rictus of panic. "Just a minor latency issue," he stammered into the microphone, tapping the keys frantically. "Wi-Fi interference." "That's not Wi-Fi," a voice called out from the front row. It was the lead investor looking at his own tablet. "The server just returned a 500 error. Did you just wipe the production database?" Greg's face drained of all color. He rushed the stage, whispering furiously at Colin. Then, in a moment of desperate self-preservation, Colin pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the room. Toward me. "It's the legacy code," Colin shouted, his voice cracking. "The architect Travis, he didn't migrate the protocols correctly. This is sabotage." All eyes turned to me. The room went silent. This was the moment he tried to bury me. I stood up slowly. I didn't shout. I didn't look angry. I walked calmly toward the SEC representative sitting near the aisle, a man named Mr. Henderson, whom I knew by reputation. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the dead silence, "check your inbox." I hit send on my phone. Simultaneously, phones buzzed in pockets across the room: legal, the board, the key investors. I had forwarded the forensic dossier. "What is this?" Henderson asked, looking at his phone. Then his eyes widened. "Forged credentials. You're looking at a timestamped log of every change made to the system in the last 2 weeks," I said, looking directly at Colin, who was now shrinking behind the podium. "Specifically, you'll see 142 critical deletions authorized by a digital signature belonging to me. But if you look at the IP address and the MAC address associated with those signatures, they all come from that laptop on the stage." Marcus, the CTO, stood up, checking his own phone. He looked at the data, then at Colin. "It's a spoof," Marcus said, his voice filled with disgust. "He forged Travis's approval to bypass the safety checks. Travis didn't break the system, Colin did." The room erupted. It wasn't the applause Colin had wanted. It was the sound of a hustle falling apart. The next hour was a blur of shouting, legal threats, and panic. The investors walked out. The SEC rep was taking photos of the screen. Colin sat on the edge of the stage, head in his hands, utterly destroyed. Greg was cornered by 3 board members who looked ready to strangle him. Finally, the room cleared, leaving just the wreckage. Me, Marcus, Greg, and a sobbing Colin. "We're dead," Greg whispered, staring at the blank screen. "The database is corrupted. We can't roll back. We've lost the client data. We'll be sued into oblivion." "You will be," I agreed, buttoning my jacket, "unless you have a backup." Greg looked up, hope warring with shame in his eyes. Colin said, backup slowed down the velocity. He deleted the snapshots. "He deleted the system snapshots," I corrected. I reached into my bag and pulled out a matte black encrypted SSD drive. But he couldn't delete the ARC. "The ARC?" Marcus asked. "A full, clean system image. Pre-Colin. It's stored on a partitioned sandbox he didn't know existed because he never bothered to read the founding charter. It's all here. The code, the client data, the stability, it works. Greg practically lunged for the drive, but I pulled it back. Ah, I said, careful, that's not company property anymore. I created that image on my own hardware using my personal emergency override credentials after my employment terms were violated by the unauthorized removal of my admin access. Greg froze. Travis, please name your price, we'll reinstate you, raise double salary. I looked at Colin, who couldn't even meet my gaze. I don't work for you anymore, Greg. I don't work for people who try to frame me, but I am willing to lease this software to you. A lease? Consulting contract, I said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. I had typed it up that morning. Monthly licensing fee for the build, hourly rate for support triple my old salary, and a strict clause: Colin is removed from the building, effective immediately. He never touches a keyboard in this company again. Greg looked at the paper, then at his son. He didn't hesitate for a second. Done, he whispered. I handed him the drive. The decryption key is on the invoice. Send the first payment by morning or the key expires. I walked out of that building into the cool evening air, and for the first time in years my shoulders didn't hurt. I didn't feel the weight of the legacy anymore. I felt free. A week later, the press release went out. Leadership restructuring at Wex Tech. Colin was out scrubbing his LinkedIn profile. Greg was stepping down to an advisory role. And me, I was sitting on my porch watching my daughter play in the yard. I had 3 job offers in my inbox, but I wasn't in a rush. My phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. Wire transfer received $45,000, the first month's licensing fee. I didn't do it to bankrupt them. I didn't do it out of malice. I did it because in a world of buzzwords and shiny suits, competence is the only currency that actually matters. They tried to erase me, but in the end, they ended up renting their entire existence from me.